Peace and blessings, Soul Fam. Adam Jackson here with another episode of the Sacred Sons podcast. Brothers, are you tapped in to your wild? Are you in touch with your inner wild? Think about that. What does that mean to you? Have you suppressed it? Has it been taken away from you? On today's episode, we are going to talk about Rewilding the Sacred Masculine with Sophie Strand. We're going to get into mythology. We're going to get into the ancient ways of what it means to be a man. So with that, our guest today, she's an author focusing on the intersection of spirituality, storytelling, and ecology. She has a new book coming out called The Flowering Wand, Rewilding the Sacred Masculine. And Sophie has rediscovered the ancient, wilder, and more magical modes of the masculine that have been hidden in plain sight. We are here to reveal those today, Sophie. Please welcome Sophie Strand.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam. I feel like that's like a big, I would say that the only thing I would add to the introduction is I am not purporting to have any answers. This is just me opening up a giant conversation, being like, I think there might be some more juice here. Can we collaborate on thinking about some more creative ways to imagine these stories?
Yeah, you know, you've spent the last 8 years researching into myth, folklore, and the history of these things. I'm really curious about, you know, what got you into this work in the first place. But before we get there, let's take a deep breath for ourselves. Scanning the body, feeling what is alive and present on this beautiful day. Sophie, in this moment, what is most alive within you?
I am feeling such a somatic echo with the landscape right now where I live in the Hudson Valley, which is that we just had this incredibly intense ice storm that destabilized the whole county, took out 50,000 homes' power. I was without power in freezing temperatures for 3 days, camping in my home. And it was crystalline, beautiful, and lethal. But now, today, everything is thawing. So it's like spring condensed into one day. It's like a sped up springtime of thaw. And I can feel it in my body too, in a strange sense. You know, I have a connective tissue disease, which means that every system in my body kind of feels pressure changes and all of these different shifts with like exquisite precision. And that can be a bad thing, but also be interesting. And so I'm feeling all these pressure shifts. I'm hearing the music of the ice groaning and smiling as it relaxes under the sun. So yeah, I'm really enjoying the way that the world is murmuring and burbling today. Beautiful. What about you?
Yeah, thanks. Adam checking in. Before we started recording, I was telling you I've been seeing hawks every day. It's been pretty special because I haven't previously had such a connection with that animal, but I see them every day in my front yard and I see them circling. I've been just enjoying like what that means to watch them and to like, you know, the imagining of what it is to be in flight, to soar, and to like, and also to like have that sacred predation in that sight, you know, because I see them, they're looking for little rodents and lizards and mice out here or whatever. But you know, just the connection with the hawks as I look up, the connection with these mountains that I'm, you know, living upon. And also you just brought up for me this idea of preparedness. And so you went without power for 3 days. I had an experience recently. We went without hot water and electricity as well for a short time. And it brings up like, hey, there's something going on. And I don't know if you feel it, but like, what is it going to look like if and when something does really happen? If and when the power grid does go out, it's like in the collective, people are talking about it. There's all this post-apocalyptic movies and shows. And so this concept of preparedness keeps returning to me and what it means to hold a family through these times in 2022, when things like the power going out is becoming more and more present. So I'm here, I'm in with it, I'm feeling good, you know. Anything more to add on that for you?
Oh, I was just thinking that for someone, so because I have these genetic conditions that mean that cascades of unpredictable problems can happen in ways that you can't prepare for. For me, the thing, when I think about being prepared for the coming social and ecologic chaos that is probably definitely going to happen, for me, the thing that steadies me is musculature and athleticism. It's that intuitive knowledge, how you help. It's not that you prepare for the fall, it's that your body knows how to do the fall. It catches you. And it's that adaptability that we can learn from fungi. You know, you pour fungi into an ecosystem and they're going to connect all the trees and the orchids. They're going to learn how to do everything. They're going to eat the radioactive substances. Like, I want to learn from oyster mushrooms how to be adaptive, because preparedness is about trying to control. And for me, that scares me. And it's part of this whole idea that we can plan everything. We can make everything work. And for me, I want to be able to like dance. It's a dance move, improvisational.
Yes, I love that. I love that. The ability to adapt to whatever situation is upon us.
Yeah.
And so, you know, I'm saying you're at the intersection of spirituality, storytelling, and ecology. What's the relationship that you see between mushrooms, the mycelium networks, and human consciousness? Let's just get right into it. What do you got?
I'm pretty fungal. I'm a mycophile, so I'm like pretty fungal obsessed, and I realize that I may have a bias. I can make I joke I can make fungi a metaphor for anything. For me, I think they have a lot to teach us right now about becoming involved, and not about living in a static, concretized idea of individuality, but realizing that we are relationally constituted. We are interstitial. We think between differences and ideas, between species. And it's that connective tissue that creates ecosystems that we need to start focusing on, rather than on, you know, proclaiming our own individual importance. So I think they offer us a really important paradigm shift in terms of anthropocentric narratives. But on a very kind of, you know, practical level, I used them when I was thinking about myth, which is I think they create more fertility when we look at mythic figures that share a lot in common. Like, do you mind me going into a little mythic?
I love you going into the mythology. Okay. We're going all the way.
Great. So historians and archaeologists and mythologists have for a long time noted that there are all of these gods in the Mediterranean basin from the Bronze Age to until, like, you know, early Christianity, that seem very similar, but they're different, and they belong to different cities and different time periods, but they share common attributes. And for me, I was thinking about them as vegetal gods associated with fermentation, with dying and being composted into the ground by their lovers, with springtime, with joy, with anarchy, with anti-imperial regimes. And they seem really like vegetally anarchic masculine figures that are all supposedly different. But then I was thinking about how fungi, so mushroom above ground looks like an individual, looks like a little being, but it's really just a hand coming up from a much larger being that lives underground. And when it creates a mushroom, it's a reproductive event. It says, I need to sporulate, I need to create more, I need to do something. And a mushroom is a very particular poem of a certain time and place. So I think that thinking about these figures like Dionysus and Jesus and Attis and Adonis and Orpheus and Osiris as all being mushrooms of the same underground mythic mycelium. And how can we see, and then in that way, we can think about mythology as being about adapting to different situations. So each mushroom is freshly adapted.
So let's go back to the beginning. Let's go to Genesis.
Let's do it.
And what in the link between Genesis and Osiris and the ecosystem. Can you speak on that a little bit?
Yeah, so we can see Osiris as being kind of one of the earliest available vegetal archetypes, kind of the compost archetype. So he's a god who is associated with fermentation and wheat in Egypt. And then he dies and he is cut up into parts by his jealous brother. And his wife resurrects him just long enough to create her hawk son, Horus. Horus, the ancient Horus. And Horus is basically the resurrected masculinity, the masculinity that fuses the animal and the male, that is stereomorphic, that overflows the human. That can control animals, birds, beings, plants. It has it all at its disposal, not in mastery, but in connective collaboration, cahooting. So Horus is kind of the really powerful figure, ultimately, of Egyptian mythology, but he's the son of Osiris, who is composted by his wife back into Egypt and makes Egypt. He's actually, so I think Osiris teaches us about becoming an ecosystem, thinking like an ecosystem. What does it mean to never, so these gods, their real wisdom is that they cycle. They never stop, they never get stuck somewhere, which is they, yeah.
So sorry.
Please.
I was just going to ask you what it seems like is that these gods, represent the cycles of nature to inform humans how to adapt, right?
Exactly.
And to not fear the darkness of winter because spring is coming, and to also like get us in tune with our own reproductive cycle and making sure our reproductive cycle is in tune with nature and the cosmos.
Yes, it's about that somatic mirroring. It's about stitching yourself back into the mycorrhizal system. Yeah. Exactly. And honoring.
Do you feel like there's do you feel like these myths were brought forward for that purpose? Originally.
Oh yeah, they seem, I mean, for me, I think, so something that I often talk about is this actual deep time example, which is that when plants first came out of the sea and came onto land, they didn't have root systems. They couldn't access nutrients or minerals or stay in place or create stable ecosystems. And fungi that create these hyphal root networks in the soil were already there. And they reached up and they brought the plants into the dirt and gave them access to the nourishment and the underworld medicine so that they could also be in touch with the sky god sun medicine. And it created this interesting symbiotic relationship where the plants were brought into place by these root systems that were already there. And so I think just as fungi taught plants how to root into place, myths teach us how to root into ecosystems. And if you look at ancient myths and stories, it's always about right relationship with land. I mean, or how to understand the plants in your landscape. The
story is in the soil.
Exactly.
The story is in the soil, and that's dope because that gives so much context to what it means to actually cultivate fertile soil for practical wisdom, applied wisdom to come through humans. Yes. So the mythology and the stories that we carry is that fertile ground for us to live and thrive upon. That's dope. Ooh, I like that.
Are there mythic figures that you have been attracted to over the years?
I would love to talk about Christ consciousness. Jesus.
Well, Jesus is my area of specialty. I have a novel coming out next spring that's just an ecological retelling of Rabbi Yeshua's story.
Let's talk about Rabbi Yeshua.
I'm there for it. Yeah. The anarchic storytelling Jewish rabbi.
Yeah. And so is there a sense that you have for Jesus's teachings also to be nature and land-based versus how they've been kind of twisted into solely being for the forgiveness of human sin?
This is my whole working thesis, and this is the inspiration behind my work with the masculine. Is I've always loved the figure of Jesus and hated Christianity and thought that there was something behind him that was healthier. So if you think of a mushroom as an ecologically situated, politically situated, it's a myth is constituted by its relations. And when you take it out of its relations, when you deracinate it, uproot it, translate it into the language of the person who killed that myth, and then try and disseminate it to countries and places that don't understand its ecology, it doesn't make sense.
It can't reroute. It doesn't reroute. And it's like the change of environment often can kill the plant.
Or make it really, really pernicious. And so my question for a long time was, how does the Jesus story make itself available to dogma and to misinformation when it seems to have disguised a much healthier figure behind it? And I think a great example is if you actually reroute the parables of Jesus and you go back, you look at the Gnostic texts, which are actually some of the earliest examples of those teachings, and then you put them next to the canonical Gospels, and you take a step back and then you look at the ecology of Galilee, where he would have been an oral storyteller. He would have not have been literate. 2% of people were literate. So everything he would have done would have been conversational. Parables were about interrupting each other, telling stories, having someone be like, no. So they were interrogative. When you look at his actual parables, they're kind of anti-imperial and vegetal. So my favorite is, he says the kingdom of God is like a mustard seed, which when we hear it today, it's kind of like, okay. But if you look at a Galilean farmer, and Plutarch, who's a historian who's contemporary at that time period, gives us some actual like context about the attitude towards mustard greens, is they were the worst invasive species. They took over your farms, they destroyed your crops, and they were really hard to control. So they're anti-agricultural. And for Galilean Jews oppressed by the Romans, they're anti-imperial. So all of a sudden, when that parable is translated away from its ecosystem, we lose its vital, intense information.
Yes. And how do we avoid that? Is it by creating the new myths? Is it, you know what I'm saying? Because in human culture, our intuition is to go back, to find out where we come from. But when you look at those Mediterranean region desert religions, they may not exactly transpose onto our modern map, right?
Yeah.
So the God of the Old Testament is like a God of wrath, and you're out in the desert and nature will be very harsh, and the sun God is harsh and beating down on you, and that's kind of the perspective. So when you take that and apply it in other places that may be more fertile, it doesn't quite align.
Exactly. And what I always want to say is, by rerouting and understanding these myths, trying to put them back in their original context and see if refracting around them, we can see new insights. What do they tell us about making stories in our own landscape? So for Jesus and Yeshua, there's a really direct example for me, which is he seems to be really interested in the plants and animals around him. Jesus seems to be really interested in the plants and animals around him and how they can teach him to be more flexible and generous and empathic. So for me, the way I work with Jesus is not by taking him literally or taking his story as my story, but looking at the invasive species that other people might not like in my area and saying, is there a different story happening? So for example, there are mustard greens here. They're different than the ones that would have been in Galilee, but they're similarly demonized by ecologists because they're invasive and they kill off the root systems of shallow-rooted deciduous trees. But for me, I'm trying to be more curious and less human-centric about the timeline and the story with these plants. I'm like, what are you doing to the ecosystem? Is there something about bringing down these trees that's important in ways that I can't see? So that's a way that I've been doing it. I also think something that's really important to me is we live in an antibiotic culture. It thinks that you can purify things, that you get rid of bad things by destroying them, but it leaves, like in a gut devastated by antibiotics, it just kills everything, and it leaves too much open real estate for monologuing pathogens. So I think with these bad stories, stories of patriarchy, stories of separation, stories of alienation and exile and ecocide, it's not that we can remove them. It's that we need to put them in a compost heap with a lot of other stuff so that they combine in this kind of mycelial rotscape to alchemically produce something new and freshly adapted. So it's about inclusion rather than excision.
Beautiful. So here's my question.
Yeah.
What transpired in your life? What are you composting in your life that brought you to researching like the mythology, and then also to, like, you know, having this focus on the divine masculine? You know, if you don't mind, like, give me a little bit of your story.
Yeah. I don't think I would have ordered this off the menu. I don't think I would have ever said I had an authority to do this if it hadn't been something that just felt like it arrived unavoidably. I've always loved myths, and I've always loved men. And I always loved myths about men. I mean, it's the truth. I mean, I think that I understand, and I'm really careful, and part of this project is about looking at how certain myths that are offered to men aren't nourishing. But I also think that there are plenty of heroic figures who kept me alive when I was growing up, who I loved, like Tristan and Dionysus and
Merlin,
Achilles.
Maybe. How about Merlin the Magician?
Yeah. Oh, Merlin. Well, I was going to actually say Merlin the Magician is who also, it stands for hawk.
Wow.
Merlin is another hawk.
Hawk medicine today. Yes.
Exactly. And Merlin is the hawk. And my obsession with the wizard Merlin actually led me to all of these studies in college. And so I've always loved myths of the masculine, but I never thought that it was going to be, I'm a fiction writer. And so these things always inspired my fiction project. So I wrote this long project, Rewilding Rabbi Yeshua and the story of the Magdalene. And then quarantine happened, and I was very ill, experiencing a flare in my illness. An engagement had broken down like a week before quarantine. So all of my professional life was stalling in ways because of the pandemic that I hadn't been predicting. So I was between stories. I was in a moment of narrative rot. And I understood that maybe the important thing was not to try and rush through this, but to see what sprouted. And what sprouted was, I thought, I love men so much, and I love these myths so much. And yet I also feel that we're all being harmed by this impoverished narrative of patriarchy that's been conflated problematically with masculinity.
Yeah, that's saying it's because it's always saying masculinity is the problem, masculinity is to blame. It's kind of like it's always put in this detrimental light. And if we continue telling young boys that story, we're going to continue getting more of the same.
Exactly. It doesn't help anyone. It's totally, it malnourishes everyone narratively. And so I kind of playfully, and this is the wild part, I playfully started to write these essays to heal myself. And to heal I thought, I want to have a son someday. I don't want to have a bad relationship to masculinity if I have a son. Like, I want to be able to raise a son with a totally healthy, vital sense of what it means to raise a boy. And can I look to these figures that I've loved, like Merlin, like Tristan, like King Arthur, like King David, who's my favorite.
I want to talk about King David too.
Yeah. I mean, King David is like so, and Joseph of Egypt. I mean, there are all of these. I also will say that I only rewilded the stories that I came from culturally, because I didn't feel like I wanted to appropriate other people's mythologies and stories.
So were you raised in Catholicism?
No, I was actually raised by an ex-Buddhist monk and ex-Catholic pagan mother. And then my family, my uncle married into an Israeli Jewish family. So I was raised with this weird combination of Zen Buddhism, and my parents write about religion and spirituality. So I was like raised in a compost heap of like monks, Theravada Buddhist monks, rabbis, theologians.
I got it. So your vessel actually is the
Yeah,
compost heap. Yes,
it is.
it really is
Yeah.
for all of these stories from different cultures. Let's go to King David.
Oh,
I want to just break some down. I spent some time in Israel. I've been to the Dead Sea.
yeah,
Um,
me too. It's amazing.
the Dead Sea was the King David's original wellness spa. Let's just call it that. But the Dead,
Yeah.
it's such a highly potent, energetic site on the earth. It's also the lowest point on earth. I think it's like, shoot, I'm going to get the number wrong. It's like 44,000 feet below sea level, something like that. But it's like an incredibly healing place till this day. You know, there's
Oh,
so many
yeah.
scrubs and soaps that come from the Dead Sea, but King David's energy and presence largely came from this area on earth. So what do you have to shed light on King David?
I also just want to say that the time I went to spend with family in Israel was when my genetic illness kicked in. It like
Mm,
kicked in the day I arrived in Israel, and like got the worst the day that I went to the Dead Sea. And so I feel so stitched into that landscape. Like my most potent memories are like of standing in the Dead Sea, looking out at that hazed mountainscape way
yes.
beyond, and just thinking like I could feel the vastness of deep time. I could feel like glaciers above me. It was just, and we have to remember that, you know, Israel, that area is like an omphalos. It's a navel of the world. It's been the center, the sink spot of so much history and mythology. It's attracted it in, which is so interesting.
Yeah, and at the same time, when I was there, I got the sense of not only of deep history, but of timelessness. And that
Exactly. Yeah.
I am here now, walking the same path that many have walked before me. And it's none is better or worse because this place energetically on earth is still so amplified, magnetizing. It still
It's a
has
portal.
it's a
Yeah.
portal. It's a portal. Thank you.
I felt it. And yeah, so King David for me, I think King David, it's super interesting because on surface level, so we have to remember that all of the characters from Genesis and Kings are written about by historians in the Babylonian exile, hundreds, if not thousands of years after the actual events. So the paint job being done has very little to do about what's under the surface. So King David looks like this patriarchal king figure, but he's actually much more complicated. When we first encounter him, he's in the fields and he's actually trying to avoid this contest for kingship that Samuel the prophet is doing. So David doesn't show up. He says
It's a classic story of the
he
reluctant
refuses
leader.
the call. Yeah.
Yes.
But his first attributes are he's a wild man. He's in the fields. And in fact, when he's explaining to Saul about why he could be a warrior, even though he has no warrior training, he says, I've wrestled with lions my whole life. Like my training is not patriarchal warrior like training. My training is like being in the woods with the animals and learning from them. And I think for me, it's so interesting. This was the first story that I wrote about when I started to write about the masculine, was when David goes to confront Goliath. This just feels like the biggest koan, to use that Zen riddle phrase. Saul offers him his armor, and David goes, that won't fit me. I don't need that. And he goes, quote unquote, naked, without a sword. He goes just with stones in his hand. And he's a boy. And so for me, he represents this magical boyhood that topples patriarchal figures, that says that I can take this, I can be king, I don't need any armor. And that to show up to being a king, it's about taking your armor off.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's holding his stones in his hand, which is like quite literal, right?
Yeah, it's tactile too. It's for me, it's about, for many thousands of years, nomadic tribes would hunt with stones and slingshots. So it's also this ancestral connection to this perhaps more connected relational way of killing animals and eating them and being in a relationship with them.
That's interesting. So it's almost like they were that story was kind of going against the technology of the time.
It is. It's really interesting.
Rewilding in that way.
It's a stowaway. I mean, the thing I think is there are all these figures that like are inside the myths of empire, but are stowaways. And King David seems like one. I mean, there's so many other aspects of him. He plays the lyre. He's a musician. Yeah, very interesting.
Cool. Let's shift to the Knights Templar. Okay, so we talked a little bit about Merlin. So the Knights of the Round Table, the Holy Grail. I've always been fascinated by this, as so many of us have. Do you have any insight on what the Holy Grail is? I have my own ideas, born from Dan Brown novels, you know.
Oh, I've read. I mean, gosh, I mean, I just read a book. The book I have coming out next year is called The Madonna Secret. So we're on the same, like,
yes.
It's all about the secret of the Magdalene. So like, we're on the same wavelength.
Cool.
Here's the craziest thing: the earliest mentions of the Grail have the Grail not being a cup, but, to go back to David, a stone.
Really?
Isn't that crazy? And that
That's
it's
awesome.
as the romantic tradition of Grail legends evolves, it becomes a chalice or a cauldron, you know, but it begins as a stone, which is very, very complex. I mean, I have theories about, you know, the Grail and Magdalene lineages. I do think it's really interesting that one of the oldest folkloric traditions is that Joseph of Arimathea, who's at the cross and provides a tomb for Jesus, goes with the brother of Mary of Bethany to England and to Glastonbury, to Avalon, and brings the Grail with him, and also, as the title of my book is, the flowering wand. And the flowering wand is actually an ancient symbol connected to Dionysus and to fermentation rites. Yeah. So it's really interesting to think about this vegetal god tradition coming with the Grail to England from the Jesus story.
Is the flowering wand also phallic?
Oh, of course.
I mean, it's obviously
yes.
phallic, but can you speak a little bit more about that? And also, you know, I don't want to mix stories, but speak more on that.
I mean, as I was approaching this project, which I wrote I wrote it online as I never thought it was going to get published. I wrote it as a joke, not because I was taking it as a joke, but because I was like, this is going to be fun. Like, let this be playful. Let my readers like talk with me. I started to see a theme, which is that swords are good tools. And they're this tool that we most often hand to our male figures. And I loved swords growing up, so I have no problem with swords. But my
sons, just so you know, I have 3 sons. They love sword fighting. I mean, my third is just a baby, but sword fighting. And when I was a kid, like there's a natural like a healthy obsession. Like let's sword fight.
Exactly. I mean, and I was a professional tarot reader for a long time, and the sword suit is very about intellect and communication, and I very much identify with that. And Joan of Arc was one of my favorite figures and who I studied very deeply. She loves the sword.
Yeah.
But I also thought that when we're thinking about what's complicated about the only myths we offer to the masculine is that we only ever hand them a sword. And the sword it's material reductionist. It's modern science. It says we can cut things down to parts. We can figure things out. We can always trust our cognition to do this job. But it's not always the way that we heal trauma or make relationships. It's a way of defending and of understanding and understanding our limits. And I thought, what if we had, so Dionysus always shows up with a flowering wand, which is like a woody stalk. Some say it was fennel. And it basically is like the precursor to the wizard's wand. and
Right.
it creates connections, it turns men into animals, it, you know, makes people fall in love, it does wild, chaotic, anarchic stuff. And I thought for a project that was attempting to offer not an opposition to the sword, but another option, the flowering wand could be about connectivity, connective tissue. What if, because men have also, they don't just hold the sword, they also hold the wand. We can give that back
Yes.
to them.
You know, as sacred sons, we use staffs,
I
you know,
saw that, yes, and I was like, yes,
so there's a
yeah.
third option. You got the sword, the wand, and the staff.
Well, I
You know,
think the staff and the,
Moses famously had the staff as well. And what you're saying
exactly,
about the connectivity, we use the staff symbolically, but it is also something that grounds us. When we place the staff onto the earth, it is a symbol of our grounding and connectiveness to the Great Mother. You know what I mean? And then we also use it for clearing energy, and what that can look like is multiple people, maybe two men who have a conflict, grounding in together by utilizing the staff. And so these are modern ways to use the symbols in the very real nature of what it means to have a staff. And of course, you can see like shepherds herding with a staff. It's a powerful looking, it's a powerful instrument to leading. You know what I mean? To leading a new way potentially.
exactly. And I mean, what I wrote about in the introduction is about Moses' staff and all. They turn into snakes. They also they flower. They bring the dowsing stick. I mean, something that I was thinking is, you know, something that the masculine used to have available is like, I can find water, like I can read the landscape with my dowsing stick. Like
Right.
9,000 years ago, there were dowsing staffs. Like there's so many modes of alternative masculinity that are like DNA, like, you know, helixed into that staff.
Yeah. And I might have actually learned this from you, but when Moses went into the desert, um, maybe you can give me the story, but he basically asked God, "What do I do about all these snakes?" And God tells him to plant a brass staff in the ground and
Yeah.
to put a snake on it. Is this
Yeah.
correct?
I haven't taught you about this, but yeah, no, I do know about this story. I haven't ruminated on it enough to offer like a perspective. But yeah, Moses is a very interesting figure that straddles like monotheism and then early folkloric Judaism, where he's like kind of against these pagan figures and the snakes, but also he wields them. I mean,
Yes.
Moses is the conduit for the plagues, like, and these plagues are anarchic, like insects. There are maybe algae blooms in water. Like Moses is kind of a wizard.
Yeah. And I mean, the point of the whole story, people can go look it up, is that, you know, this is the word of God coming
Yeah.
down. It doesn't make much sense. Why, you know, how can we remove snakes by planting a staff and
Yeah.
putting an image of a snake on it? Yet here we are in 2022, and our medical, you know, all of the medical corporations use the staff, the cross,
The
and the snake,
caduceus, yeah, I
the
know.
caduceus, as the symbol for health
I
to
know.
this day. You know what I mean? And that's also the power of mythology that we carry. But yet many of us, including myself, have forgotten the meaning of these things.
Yeah. I know. But I think the thing that I always want to offer is orality and scripture was originally oral and relational, conversational, somatic, performed, and it lives in your body. And your body knows how. Just as I was saying earlier, that like, you know, you fall and your body catches you. That
Yeah.
mythology is going to catch you too. These mythic myceliums, all you need to do is to take your shoes off, literally, and go put your feet in the dirt, and they're going to come up through you. They're going to root you in, and your body's going to tell you how.
Yeah. We have this understanding nowadays that all of the answers are within us. And, you know, for many of us who've sat with plant medicines or who've done deep work, there's a sense of unlocking this information. And it really does start with rooting into the earth, laying on the grass,
Yeah.
allowing the sun to hit your skin and feeling those uploads come. they're not coming from the cosmos. You are the cosmos embodied in your human experience. And so the uploads are coming from a cellular level, activated by grounding to the earth. And so I love what you're saying there, because maybe it's not about understanding a 2,000-year-old story. Maybe it's about uploading a story today with the same sentiment that they had 2,000 years ago.
Exactly. We have the same bodies that they had. I mean,
Yes.
that's the craziest thing, is like our bodies do the same thing. So if we put them in the ecosystems that we are fruiting from, we're probably going to be able to access similar wisdom. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Are there any modern myths in the making that you feel like attracted to, or you feel like you resonate with?
Well, I will say that I was raised on Tolkien, and then I watched the Lord of the Rings movies, and they were deeply informative for me growing up. I think because, I grew up around boys. My cousins were all boys. My brother was a boy. I kind of thought of myself as a boy. And I loved the kind of friendships that were available in the Lord of the Rings stories between men. And I felt like I didn't see that anywhere else. And it was like, it was a story that wasn't about romance or about rape or about trauma. I mean, bad things happen. It's a story about friendship, male intimacy and friendship. And
fellowship.
Fellowship, right? And camaraderie. Yeah. Like tying everyone together.
And might I add, brotherhood.
Yes.
Which is the medicine, the medicine for men.
I know. I mean, one of the things that I write about in the book is how you can watch certain gods as they evolve through empire get turned against each other. And it's a way of dividing and conquering. Like you can watch myths of male friendships get destabilized and like turned into villains. And it's a way of actually disempowering men. Is destabilizing their ability to create brotherhood.
Well, let me send you back to Cain and Abel.
Yeah, exactly.
Go.
I mean, I think it's well, you see there also the opposition between nomadic life, wildlife, and civilized life. And this kind of dualism that's already arriving. But yeah, I would say for modern myths, who are people who are doing this really, really well? Well, here's something interesting. This isn't a myth, but I really loved this album that Johnny Flynn and Robert McFarlane did, which was a rewilding of the Gilgamesh story. And it was a really interesting way. So it's two men making music together about an ancient friendship and updating this old myth in this kind of melodic, experimental way. And I thought that was like such a great prototype for what you can do. That was interesting. It's really fun music.
I have to check it. I feel like really inspired to open up the Old Testament and reread it through this lens, through the lens of the natural world. There's so much
there. Yeah.
There's so much there. There's so much there. And it's actually like, it's our oldest book, that we have to return to. And it's even from the, from the modern perspective, it is, it does provide insight to look back and to maybe not necessarily find our own meaning in it, but to find our own resonance with those words. I feel like the Old Testament is technology. As much as it's mythology, I feel like it's technology to also upload.
Yeah, I mean, for me, one of my real patron saints is Joseph of Egypt from Genesis, who with the many-colored coat, who dreams of wheat and wheat bowing before him, and seems to have this kind of vegetal plant medicine experience, like plants dreaming through Joseph, that his brothers make fun of, and they sell him into slavery. But then in Egypt, he's recognized for this ability to dream plants and to let plants dream through him. And he gives the Pharaoh the ability to prepare for drought, and the Pharaoh listens to him. And then, of course, his brothers aren't prepared because they haven't believed him. And I think Joseph of Egypt shows me that there's something that we can inherit, which is the ability, like men aren't just about mastery and dominion. They're about letting plants dream through them. And I think that we see right now in psychedelic culture, although I have some issues with how it's unrolling right now, I do think that there's something inherently powerful about letting plants dream through you. And we can see that come up in Genesis again and again.
Yeah, we see it with Moses and the burning bush,
Yeah.
which many theologians attribute to the acacia bush, which
Yeah.
has a high concentration of DMT. So like the burning bush, it could be that he came upon a bush that was on fire and inhaled some fumes,
Yeah.
or it could be also that the DMT was extracted from the acacia bush and
Yeah.
intentionally smoked on top of Mount Sinai to get these downloads from God. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
it's not far, again, because we have the same human bodies.
Yeah.
Maybe it had to be written a certain way for the time. But like you're
Exactly.
pointing out, so many of us who have sat now with the plant medicines of DMT, ayahuasca, psilocybin, we can understand what it means to dream those plants.
Yeah.
You have your own experience with plant medicines?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm very wedded to fungi.
Yeah.
I love fungi, and I've had a very medicinal experience with psilocybin, both large doses and then actually mostly with microdosing, which I found to be hugely helpful with trauma in ways that every other therapy never touched.
Yeah, the consistency in small amounts over time, it does like kind of promote a gradual healing effect.
Yeah.
And I'm also one who's here for the deep dives, and
No, me too. Yeah.
I've also accessed like this sense of Christ consciousness, which does like connect me to the spirit that's moving through all things. And it's something that is undeniable once experienced. You know, it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Exactly. I mean, there's a reason why people rank these experiences like as the top most important experiences in their life. I would too. And I think that the plants and the fungi want to be involved with us. Just like the fungi wanted to teach the plants how to have root systems, I think that these medicines are arriving right now to teach us how to have roots.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what is the role of the divine feminine within this masculine mythology? I now have your motivation and the why of you doing this work, but have you had a sense or a deepening into the feminine through this work?
So I of course originated in a divine feminine. My parents are very interested in Marian practices and how pagan practices of the lady, like the Lady of the Beast, get grafted into Catholicism. And I've had a long relationship with the story of Mary Magdalene. So I've always been really interested in the divine feminine. But recently I felt like divine feminine isn't big enough for me. And that neither divine masculine or divine feminine are big enough for me. I think of them less as, I never want to be gender essentialist, never want to say that this is a biology. For me, they're morphic fields. They're patterns of behavior that we fruit into and instruct our behaviors. And they're interesting to understand, but they're more fields than dualisms. And so I think sometimes when we talk about divine feminine, it can seem like a rearticulation of like patriarchy. Like if we say like just sacred masculine or just divine feminine, it's too human for me. I want something that's plushier, that's mossier, that's stinkier, that's weirder. And so
you want the mushrooms. You just want to be, you want to be a mushroom is what I'm getting.
I do. But it also, so I really love figures. So for me, someone I've been writing about is how, if you look back at the worship of Aphrodite or Venus, this classic feminine figure, the oldest versions of Aphrodite are inherently either intersex or some non-binary thing, which is they have a phallus and breasts, and their followers very deeply seem to think that they represent something that's not just divine feminine or divine masculine. And Aphrodite gets simplified over time into this kind of beautiful goddess figure. And I'm interested about how the divine feminine can sometimes be a way of simplifying what is much funkier and weirder.
Yeah. The overarching theme here is that it's about the harmony, the unification of divine feminine and sacred masculine within each of us as our own beings, to find that harmony, which really allows us to thrive in the fullness of ourselves.
I would expand it. I would say it's about, maybe like that caduceus of the two snakes merging, to see that it's about oscillating between different modes. Sometimes I say it's not about the merging of the divine and the masculine. It's about looking at the moon and thinking that the moon is always the moon, but it's at a different phase every day of a lunation cycle. So it's some days we are fused, some days we are one thing, some days we're another. That mutability is perhaps the rule, change is the rule, rather than any kind of fixed node of identity. And the one thing, the most important thing for all of us right now is, no matter what we identify as, no matter what we're doing, we need to decenter human narratives. We need to look at our ecosystems. We need to look at the stories that are non-human that we need to provide a mouth for. So if you're interested in the divine feminine, what does it smell like if it doesn't smell like a human? What does it look like if it doesn't look like a human? Yeah. What does it need from you if it doesn't need human things? Yeah.
Yeah, breaking apart those anthropocentric falsehoods, those narratives that continually put us at the center, when it's like, it's been proven time and time again, whether it's, earth-centric, religions, or it's sun-centric religions. And then we as the further we zoom out, we realize that we're not always at the center.
No.
Both as a collective and as individuals. I'm going to ask you some more weird questions here.
Do it. I'm glad.
I'm just interested. You're a very interesting character. How about this notion of alien disclosure that's happening right now? UFO in the mythology of these beings that may be around. Are you interested in this field at all?
Well, here's the funny thing. So I live in the Hudson Valley, which is considered one of the most highly reported places in the world of alien sightings. And so I live in a place where this is part of the folklore, is this is where people have these experiences. And I've experienced pretty weird stuff in the Hudson Valley. Is it aliens, or is it, my study of science shows me that uncertainty is probably the more generous, fertile place to say. Could it be aliens? Yes. Could it be something else equally weird? Yes. I have no idea.
Could there be natural phenomenon that we're just now being not aware of and just now being exposed to potential?
So I'm always open to being surprised and to having a better story arrive. So I'm here for the alien disclosure stuff. I also have no idea what to make of it. What about you?
I am deeply invested in it, and I have a couple different theories. I used to prescribe to it's us in the future coming back type of theory.
I've heard that.
Now I'm more in alignment with, there are beings that are literally on our planet, who can come in and out of this dimension, the one that the 3-dimension reality that we are able to access. And actually in 4 dimensions, right? And I think that they're here, and they're doing a similar thing from a different perspective, which is trying to understand the fabric of the universe.
Yeah.
And they're here because we're fucking up. They would like to guide us, and it's like you can't help someone that doesn't want to help themselves. So they can't quite do it. But as our consciousness raises, I believe in our lifetime, and maybe soon, that we will find out. We'll find out if there really are other life forms, other intelligent life forms that are on our planet.
Yeah.
Aside from all the orcas and the dolphins, you know what I mean?
It would make sense. I always think with these things is wouldn't you want to err on the side of there being more complexity rather than less?
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. We're so human focused and
I know.
and human centric that we can't even see the possibility when it's obvious we live in an infinite universe of possibility.
Yeah.
So
Expanding into what? Yeah.
Yeah. And so like all of these religions have really ruled out the possibility for other life forms to engage with us.
Yeah. Well,
anyways, that was just a side note. I'm just curious
well, you
about
should,
where you were.
Side note, what I'm really interested in is time loops.
Cool.
Because some people say they're an alien phenomena. Who knows what they are? There have been more in the Hudson Valley than anywhere else, and I've experienced them, which is like you're driving somewhere, you get lost, you think 2 minutes pass, you come back, it's been like 5 hours later. People are constantly having weird things like that in the Hudson Valley. Yeah. I love mystery.
I love mystery. I love being a human. I love this experience of being a soul in a human body in this incarnation. Do you have a sense that you came into this particular timeline? Where you stand on past lives and past selves and all these type of things?
I was raised by people who really believe in reincarnation. So I really believe in reincarnation. And that is a story that has been helpful for me. I wouldn't impose it on anyone else, but I do. I have a sense there are places I've been, there are things I've known that I can't see how else those things would have happened without some kind of continuity. I have a thing called soup theory, though, which is that it's less that one soul easily migrates to the next. And it's more that at the end of your life, you get poured into a big bowl of soup. And then the next life is a cup and it comes in and it takes some more soup. So it's got some soup from someone else, from you, from another person. And so I like this idea of consanguinity, like this mixing of lives that come together in particular people. What about you?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a natural analogy for that, which is water. All of the water that's on Earth is the same water that's always been on Earth from the beginning of time. And this water holds the memory of consciousness. So the water that is in my body and that will flow into a river, you know what I'm saying? And, a deer will drink it or whatever. It's like, it's all the same water. So there is a cosmic soup that we are part of.
Exactly.
Regardless,
There's some biologist who I love who said, we're just animated water. That's what we are. That's what life is. And I loved that. Yeah.
Animated water. Beautiful. Sophie, I'm excited for your book to come out. The pre-orders are available now. The Flowering Wand, Rewilding the Sacred Masculine. If you had anything to offer to the brothers and sisters who may be listening about what it means to rewild their inner masculine, what would you say to them?
Follow what you love. And like a bee, you will go to a flower and then you'll incidentally pollinate something just because you're following your desire. So follow your loves and know that it will draw you into your ecological niche. Love is the answer. Very simply. Yeah.
Love is the answer. Sophie, keep doing your thing. Keep doing this research. I like your perspective and the passion that you have for this mythology and in your own sacred masculine within. It seems like your hero's journey is to understand yourself a bit in this way.
I think so. Thank you so much, Adam. This feels like it's been a really special place to open up these things. Thank you.
Yeah. Next time I'll skip the alien stuff and we'll do more myths.
I don't know. I'm down. Here's the thing. I think about this stuff all the time just because it's such a big deal in the Hudson Valley.
Yeah. Well, the thing about water also is that I believe some of these life forms are existing underground potentially in underwater.
I mean, have you read about deep carbon?
Deep carbon, no.
Okay, I'm going to send you some stuff because we don't know anything that's happening underneath the ground.
Totally.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Adam, thank you so much. This was really, really fun. It seems like you're just like really doing the work in really big, powerful ways. Yeah, thank you. I'm doing my best, calling in the brothers, you know what I'm saying, for collective healing, for individual growth, and for full empowered embodiment.
I really feel for all humans, like we should all be striving to be our best and highest. You know what I mean? Not succumbing to comfort and to the story that someone else has written for us. Like I'm all about the adventure. For me, Sacred Sons has been an experience of rewilding in my own way and in my own leadership. So thank you for being here and for seeing us. And we'll do this again.
Yeah, and I'm gonna send people your way. I know plenty of men who need this work. So thank you for offering one of the only opportunities for it right now. Yeah. Yeah,
and that piece that you have identified in brotherhood, in masculine intimacy, these are the things that we actually that we actually practice, that we actually bring into our spaces because it's real, because it's needed, and because it's been denied to us for way too long. So with that, Sophie Strand, Adam Jackson, Sacred Sons, The Flowering Wand. Pick it up. We're out, family. Peace.